Hello and welcome everyone. This is Taco Movie Talks here with Matt. And today we are going to talk two movies from the directors of John Waters and Lars von Trier. They're both, in my words, provocateurs of sorts. John Waters, one to push the boundaries, and Lars von Trier certainly in that same boat. I had heard, interestingly enough, or I guess seen John Waters for the very first time in a movie of Jackass. And I don't know how many people will remember it because it's just one scene, and I don't know what part of the trilogy. It was probably Jackass 2, but he's in for one part where Wee Man is on the bed and a tremendously fat woman jumps on top of Wee Man and he disappears. And John Waters was there to bless that scene. And when I first saw him, I thought he was like a pornography director. And it turns out I wasn't too far off with that. Matt, first of all, how are you? And second of all, what are your just opening thoughts of these directors? How did you hear about them? And what do you think about their style of filmmaking?
I'm doing well. Both of these directors were definitely um, two of the ones where when I first started getting into movies, they were very attractive to me because when I first started getting more into films, I was interested in movies that were very different than like your typical movie you would see at the theater. And I'd say both these directors, pretty much their entire filmographies are those types of movies where you couldn't just throw them on and in front of like all your friends or your family, or you'd probably get some weird reactions, and everyone would be like, what is this, what are we watching? So yeah, that's kind of what drew me to them, and I feel like they are both provocateurs, like you said, like in their first and foremost, right? Like when you think about these directors, you're not going to think of like an entertaining uh movie you would see at the theater. You're going to think of, I want to watch these just to see how messed up these movies are. And you hear about them on Letterboxd. You see people when they leave reviews about what crazy scenes happened in these films. It kind of excites me and makes me want to watch them. So yeah, just that whole like outlandish, like a movie that would be banned by certain governments, and these movies probably are banned in certain countries, I'd imagine. So that's kind of what attracts me to them. I love to try and watch like disturbing movies. And in a way, they're kind of, or at least, yeah, these both are kind of funny, in a dark humor sense as well, which I tend to like, black satires or dark humor type of films.
Yeah, and you said something that I think completely applies to like my mentality in film now, because for a long time I was very much just kind of watching what was in theaters, what was new, what just came on to streaming, what was new to rent, whatever. And the more and more film you watch and the more you become interested in film, it's hard to explain, but I think you did a very good job of explaining it. It's like, and this doesn't completely capture the essence, but normal movies, quote unquote, become boring for lack of a better term. And I think a lot of even mainstream movie connoisseurs are starting to kind of fall into this. And it's so easy to jump on the Marvel hate bandwagon, and I'm not saying that it even applies to me, but people are kind of getting burnt out of that formula. And I think you're seeing that same formulaic nature taking its toll on people who really love film on new releases because they just seem to be playing it so safe. And then you see two directors a la John Waters, a la Lars von Trier who are going out of their way to put something to film that you haven't seen. It's going to push your buttons, and you know that going in, and that's kind of the point of the film. And like to your point, the disturbing films, the films that push the bounds of what you see, do become exciting when you've seen so much of the very same thing just get pushed and pushed and pushed. Gaspar Noé is another person who I think felt like falls into this category that Lars von Trier and Waters fall into. Quite frankly, the notion of what Pink Flamingos represented, I couldn't really sell it to someone who isn't already like within the group of people that would appreciate this. And even a few years ago, I probably would have thought it to be just a ludicrous notion. But now I can see what it's trying to accomplish, and I appreciate it. And while my rating might not be nearly as high as the people who love this film, I can still appreciate it. And same goes for Von Trier. I really, really appreciate what they did with this. I think it's easy to write off, but I think there's something deeper there. And trying to put my finger on the pulse of that, I think, is what I'm going to try to accomplish here today with you, Matt, to just like diagnose what they were trying to accomplish and how they did achieve that goal.
Yeah, I think for me, part of the reason I love these so much is it's like they are both movies that are what I would call like trolling. Like, you know, when someone trolls online, they're trying to get a reaction from someone. Like that's the whole purpose of what they're saying is to get a reaction. And I feel like both of these movies are trolling in that same way. They're like it's like the whole purpose of the movie is to get reactions from the audience. And I personally just have a dark sense of humor and find that stuff really funny. And I feel like, you know, if you don't, you're taking it too seriously if you're gonna like go off on these films and talk about how like, you know, they're not politically correct or how they shouldn't have been made and they're just messed up. Well, I feel like if you have that opinion, you're kind of doing exactly what these directors want you to do. Like they want you to feel that way. And if you're uncomfortable with it, then I feel like maybe not that it's not the movie for you, but I feel like, you know, John Waters and Lars von Trier both went in and making these films where if they were to premiere at a film festival and like 75% of the crowd walked out, they would be happy with that. Like that would be
Mm-hmm.
part of their intention, which I kind of find to be a like funny and inspiring type of like motivation for making a film. It appeals to me.
Yeah, I agree. What I'm gonna say, maybe not very controversial, maybe to some it is, but I will say, John Waters from Baltimore, Lars von Trier, he's Danish, but I think it still can be said that these two films are as American as apple pie, and I'm gonna explain because, like what you were saying, the freedom of expression, freedom of speech, something I feel like is a core tenet of what makes any nation great. And the thing about freedom of speech is that it applies most directly to the things you absolutely don't want to hear, don't want to see, what have you. These films would be very offensive to a lot of folks, and that is what they were going for, clearly. And I think it is, to your point, special in that they were to create something of substance while parading this mentality of, yeah, I'm going to make this film's going to be fucked up and a lot of people are going to hate it, but you know what? I'm going to make it anyways. And it's it's a commendable attitude. And quite frankly, if I were a filmmaker in some parallel universe, I would want to have that same mentality because I think there is freedom in that. And it allows you to make whatever film you want to make without fear of what other people say because clearly you don't give a shit what they think.
Yeah, I love that as well. Like, cause as I've been into movies for a while now, one thing you learn is that so many films are partly the way they are because of the production studio and because the director, he'll have screenings where they'll get a bunch of people in to watch a movie and they rate it and they say what they do and don't like about it. And then, the production company will be like, well, you need to take these parts out of the movie because, all these people are offended by it or these people don't like this. Whereas here, obviously that was not the case at all. And I feel like you truly get to see like these directors that are provocateurs already, like just make whatever they want free of any type of control. And you really get to see, I think, like true artistry when you have this much freedom because what studio that wants to make money is going to approve of films that have these themes. Like I probably none of them.
Yeah, you have to dig into your own pockets to make this happen, and I'm happy that they did. And I think as we discuss them, again, like I said, I think these are easily dismissible films. But if you really do dig deep into them, I think there's a lot more there than critics would maybe want to give credit. And we picked out two films that are positively rated, so a lot of other people have found the essence or the magic in these films. But and I know we're not going to be able to like convert people who would hate this film to say, you know what, you're right, but these films are out there and they found their core audience, and I think that's tremendous. One thing that I kind of wanted to pivot to, and I think you might honestly find this to be a little bit surprising, or maybe even not, but John Waters actually was a big fan of art house cinema. Does that surprise you at all, Matt? Or can you kind of see that in his films?
I can definitely see that. I feel like John Waters is of is the type of person who if I met him, we would really get along because he seems so funny and I've seen a lot of his movies and all of them make me laugh and he just has like he has the type of like spirit of a person who is genuinely like uncaring. Like, he was making these movies back in the time when, LGBT and gay people were very much like in the underground of society. Like they weren't being sponsored by all these big corporations. There wasn't a pride month. Like it was much more of like a rebellious underground thing to go to a drag show or to these were like pure outsiders and outcasts is the best way I would describe it. And I've always loved movies that are made by or include outcasts and have this like sense of humor that is making fun of like of society and societal norms. And I feel like all John Waters movies are making fun of that that culture in America where you're like, you're supposed to have the white picket fence, the husband or the wife and the two children. He is just in a way deconstructing that, and I have always really enjoyed movies that do that because I just very much take a absurdist point of view on life. Like those aren't, that stereotypical white picket fence life in America is is only normal because it's like, what people in this culture say is normal. And he's just kind of picking that apart. And I find it really enjoyable and I think it's funny.
And and to further your point, as you said, it's a film that highlights the outcast, and it feels like a film made by the outcasts and for the outcasts. And while the people depicted in the film are kind of, they're painted as like these despicable human beings, right? But in a way, I feel like it's a celebration of the outcasts. It's flipping everything on its head. It's being trashy, being bad is good in this film, and in this way, like he takes all the criticisms that these groups of people probably would have faced when the film came out, and turns them into something that they can like wear as a badge of honor. In by doing so, it celebrates these people, and I think it's actually pretty brilliant the way it was able to do that.
Yeah, I agree. Like just the fact that the main plot point is to be the filthiest, trashiest, worst human being. Like that whole narrative itself is hilarious to me. Like I love it. And I totally, I'd seen this before and on the rewatch, I forgot a lot about these scenes and or some of the worst ones I didn't even remember. And watching them all over again, I was like, oh man, this is like terrible, but at the same time, it's so interesting. It's that same concept of why people like to watch the aftermath of a car accident, like the rubbernecking, like that's kind of like the same thing here. Like I kind of want to avert my eyes, but at the same time, I want to see it.
Yeah, I would also make the same similarity with the idiots and pink flamingos. It's so like just it's chaotic. It's chaos. It's the wreck on the side of the road. It's the derailed train. It's so crazy and out of the norm that, like you said, you kind of have to watch it. It immediately calls for your attention, and that is something to be said. It like normal movies, they try to draw your attention through action, and they kind of found this cheat code to do it with something that's so unacceptable in polite society that it's, you never see it, and for that reason it calls for your attention.
Right, right. And I have written down. I decided to write down all of the things. I'm sure we could get into it later, but there's like eight different moments I wrote down about the movie where I was just like, oh my gosh, like he's totally trying to be offensive here. Like just nonstop. Like I feel like that is the goal, is to make the most offensive movie possible for Pink Flamingos. And the idiots, it's kind of the same thing, just in a different way. But I feel like, maybe Pink Flamingos is more like um it's making fun of, or not making fun of, but it's depicting horrible things, like rape and kidnapping and murder and eating disgusting things. Whereas the idiots is more like, we're making fun of a group of people that it's like you were not supposed to make fun of those people. Like it's very looked down upon. So two different types of like offensive things. Um, but they're both offensive in their own way.
Exactly. One of the similarities that you kind of alluded to is that there are communities seemingly that revolve around that, like being like it's not as though their attention or intention, maybe in pink flamingos it is, but to be offensive, but it's to, I guess, embrace this freedom of going against the social norm in The Idiots and in Pink Flamingos, and that's ultimately what brings them together. And also, another similarity is that there's seemingly a hierarchy in both of the films, the people who are the essence or the epicenter of their respective groups. Divine being one, and then there's kind of the central figurehead in The Idiots that is most committed to the cause, and it's funny, and maybe I'm going too deep, exploring these themes too deep, because they're both satirical and supposed to be absurd. But in these respective movie universes, it's almost as though it's like a religion or a cult of sorts that they have created these two central figureheads.
Yeah, it is. I feel like, the characters in both films are like really celebrating and like worshiping in a way these doing these things that are looked upon, by pretty much everyone as despicable. Like in Pink Flamingos, they're trying to be the filthiest people alive by doing, horrible things, like horrible actions. And it's their goal like to be like a filthy, trashy, horrible person. And in The Idiots, it's their goal to act like they are mentally challenged, and that is in some way that they seems to elevate them. It's like they're trying to teach all the regular people some kind of lesson by going around and acting like they're mentally challenged. It's like they're trying to activate a part of themselves that people don't like that you never see people activate in real life.
I definitely, I'm with you. It's like, especially in The Idiots, they're trying, I don't even know if they're trying to like shine a mirror or a light on them, or have make them have an epiphany through these interactions where they're acting retarded, and to get them to like notice something. But I I, I really like the like philosophical discussions that the leader seems to have, and you could probably poke a lot of holes in what he's trying to divulge with the group or trying to discuss with the group. But in the film, it does seem as though it helps a lot of the people, whether they realize it or not, to kind of to let go all pretenses with the people that you generally would care about. Because I mean, most of the time we put so much stock in what people think about us, and we might only see them on that one occasion. And by just like celebrating this lifestyle, you're completely putting that in the rearview mirror and not putting so much stock in that. And there is something to it, doesn't matter how terrible the means are. There is like a little nugget of truth in so acting that way, I guess.
Yeah, it's really interesting because I like there's this one scene where the teacher, I think he's a teacher, goes to this classroom and they're there trying to convince him to start spazzing, is what they call it, um, while he's teaching, and he just won't do it. And that made me think, like, well, like, everyone has their normal life, like they go to work or school or what have you. Like, and I was thinking, well, if I went to my job and this was like I had these people following me telling me, okay, you have to start acting like you're retarded in the middle of work and basically like put your job on the line for this, like, can you do it? And it's like this weird sense of like almost like a nihilistic type perspective, like,
Hmm.
can you throw everything that you care about in your life away to have this weird type of freedom? And it's not like a freedom I guess it's kind of a freedom to do what you want, but it's kind of just a freedom to make yourself look like an idiot and then, see what the consequences are. But it's like, and it, to me, it like puts it in perspective that we do live in this, you know, in a society where we have to act a certain way. Like there are rules that are often unwritten that you just don't do. And I feel like part of the point of the idiots is to see if this group of people can um, go around and just completely lose that sense of their life or of reality, of trying to fit in and just blend in society.
Yeah, I see a little bit of a similarity between this and maybe like the flower children of the 60s, like the hippies that, and I didn't live it, so this is just like an outside perspective and what I've seen in documentaries and film, other sources of media. But let me know if this kind of tracks for you, or if it speaks to you as well. But it seems as though it's to just like almost completely cut off from the outside world and only exist and coexist in this newfound group, where that's where your new meaning comes from. Does that kind of track it all for you?
Yeah, because they're like going. It is kind of like a cult, like you were saying earlier. Like they're going. They're in this group together, and I don't think any of them would be acting like this individually. But I think that the point seems to be they're trying to achieve this new state of mind where they just completely let go of themselves. In a way, they forget about everything in their life. But then it's like it also paired with this weird, funny type offensive aspect where okay, the way they're going to go and forget about their life instead of maybe like going and doing drugs together or some other type of escape from reality, this escape from reality they choose is to act like they're mentally disabled, which is just like I feel like this is I don't know how he came up with this idea is the best way to put it. Like it's a very strange idea from Lars von Trier.
And I think like it's just something you would never think to do for multiple reasons, cuz but first and foremost is it just seems like an idea that's off the table. And that's not even to say like I feel like I'm creative enough to even think of this if I was just open to all possibilities. But it's like there's a dark recess of your brain that just keeps like ideas that are so ludicrous from even ever reaching your tongue. And for him, he was just like, fuck it, I'm gonna go all the way. And doesn't matter how inappropriate, how stupid maybe this idea might be, I'm just gonna go for it. And we got this film. And I agree with you. And I think there's multiple reasons why just no one would have ever made this besides Von Trier.
Yeah, because you think of his other movies, they're all very dark. They're all very offensive. And I'm not sure which ones you have seen of his, but I feel like this might be his most like I'm not gonna say this is his like magnum opus, like this is his best movie. But I feel like if there was a movie that defined him as a director, it might be this one, just because like all his other movies, they're all pretty dark. They all have really kind of scary and offensive themes to them. They're all the type of movies that people are like, I wouldn't ever watch this with my parents or my girlfriend or my boyfriend. And I feel like this is just Lars von Trier. If you gave him a camera and you said, okay, tomorrow you're going to start like filming a movie, like you need to come up with an idea. Like this is, in my opinion, seems to be something that sat in his mind for a while and that he really wanted to do. Um, and which is saying a lot about his state of mind.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it captures his essence in a way. And while the ending is very difficult to watch as a audience member, there is it's almost from what I've seen. So I've seen the element of crime, I've seen the idiots, I've seen Dogville, I've seen Antichrist, and I've seen Melancholia. And the other films are very bleak that I've seen, minus the idiots. I don't know if uplifting or it has more of a vibrant spirit. Even the lighting, and it's a Dogma 95, if I'm getting that right, film. And so it's all natural light, but it's even brighter than the other films I've seen. Did you kind of get that feeling as well, that there's like it's maybe even just a more happy film than most of his other films?
Yeah, it is. His other This is one of those like unofficial trilogies with people call it like the Golden Heart or something like that, Golden Lion trilogy with Breaking the Waves and Dancer in the Dark. And those are actually my two other favorite Lars von Trier's films besides this one. So I know you didn't mention those, so I would definitely recommend those. Those are also darker though than The Idiots. Like you were saying, I feel like The Idiots is it's only dark in the sense that they're making fun of a disabled group, and it's not dark in the sense of like people are dying or there's these really people are getting tortured, or like something like an Antichrist. So I'm sure you could get what I'm saying,
Mm-hmm.
but I feel like there's a well, like his other movies don't really have a sense of um upliftingness, like that there's a point, like they're trying to achieve something here that they think is a good thing. And in the other his other films, I feel like it's all kind of bad, all kind of dark. And the way that this is offensive is much different. It's not offensive like Pink Flamingos. This is how I'd say these movies are different. Pink Flamingos would be more like his other films in the sense that there's a lot of like crime happening, a lot of horrible things are happening to people. Where in this, it feels more like if you found this movie on the street, you would think it was a home video and you would think it was completely real.
Yeah, I completely agree. And the Dogma 95 aspect really it plays a big role in that as well.
Yeah, and one interesting thing I found after I watched this for the second time that I couldn't really find an answer to was I was trying to figure out if these scenes, at least in public, were real or if it was set up or not. And I know the rule of Dogma 95, I think it is supposed to be real, but I genuinely couldn't figure it out. And if it is, then this is like a very retro version of these YouTube videos and these contemporary YouTube videos and TikToks where people are essentially pranking people in public by acting weird ways or doing certain things. This is like the first of those types of films, which is interesting.
If if it is real, I feel like they really put their necks on the line. Um, Especially, do you remember the scene where one of the young people in the group is in a booth with like these two biker dudes and a female at the bar?
Oh yeah. Yeah, that's one of the most uncomfortable parts.
And they think he has to go to the bathroom, and one of the biker holds the guy's dick as he's peeing. And I thought, I mean, it was hilarious, but you feel so uncomfortable as you kind of empathize with this guy who's like, he could so easily literally just get his head kicked in if the jig was up, if we're like, if this is real life and this scenario is really happening and they figure out that you're acting, not only are they going to kick your ass for acting mentally disabled, but also now these ultra macho and masculine dudes touched your penis and they're going to be violent without a doubt.
Yeah, that was one of the parts where I was thinking this is real. Like it just doesn't seem fake. Like no, like none of the, maybe it's just you know how good of a director he is, but like none of the people in public that they interact with seem like actors whatsoever. And I I feel like in a way like he's challenging the actors. I think he is doing this. I think he is really challenging the actors. I think the scenes are real. And I think that he is like in a way I've heard Gaspar Noé talk about his filmmaking and how there's not really a script and how they just kind of go with it. And basically he sets up situations and and it's all kind of spur of the moment and he just films how the people react to this and he tries to get their real reactions to these things to make it more genuine. And I can't help but think that he's that Lars von Trier is doing that exact same thing here. He has like this talent for setting up for like getting these people into this zone of acting like they're mentally challenged and then putting them in these situations where it's like these situations where they want to break this character, you know, as much as they can, like they want to break it so bad, but he's just standing there filming, and so like inside they know that they can't break it for the movie. And so you see this like controversial of their like them like going through this controversial moments in their inner self, like thinking like what, probably like having thoughts like why am I doing this, like is this really worth it for a movie? And that scene with the bikers I think is like one of the key moments where I felt that. And it's also what made me think of that is the scene where they bring in the actual mentally challenged people and you can kind of see the actors getting getting pissed off, and it's definitely legitimate in my opinion. So I feel like he's doing things like, hey, like okay guys, like group, we're all gonna go to this restaurant to eat, and then all of a sudden, unbeknownst to the actors, these like real mentally challenged people come in, and then he just films how the actors handle it. And that is like a very true type realistic type of filmmaking in my opinion, because you're not setting up there's no lines, you're not setting up fake situations, these are all real situations. And so in a sense it's like watching a documentary kind of. And the you know as you know by now, some of my favorite movies are those types of films that blur the line between could this be real, could this be a documentary. I really love that kind of stuff.
Yeah. And I want to get to the scene that you mentioned where the really mentally challenged people show up. There was another director, and I don't know if it's Bresson, and I know he has a very similar mentality when it comes to actors, but I think I've heard, and I don't know who specifically, but for them, they like to use a lot of first time actors or just like not actual actors because sometimes they'll just be able to capture the essence a lot better because they're just like, hey, just react to this, and you are more clearly able to get across what's supposed to be communicated by the actual point of conflict. And I feel like actors are much better at probably revealing themes that come about through dialogue, but especially for something like The Idiots and even Pink Flamingo, where much of the film is communicated by the actual moments and it's very much show don't tell, that kind of mentality I think really lends itself to this type of filmmaking, where it's just kind of actually push them into the waters and then get the reactions. To that point, when they brought the mentally disabled people to the compound or the house, whatever you want to call it, what is going on in the film and what is happening in real life parallel each other so well that it's just magic, quite frankly, because like you said, as an actor, you are probably questioning why you took this role in the first place. It's so controversial. You probably worry about your career because, you know, you could get blacklisted for shit like this. And Von Trier had already made a name for himself even this early in his stint, and he's going to be able to rebound from this. But as an actor, I mean, are you just going to be completely written off because, oh, you're that guy from that terribly offensive movie I saw? And you made fun of a group of people who can't defend themselves. And then, bang, you are faced with the group that is potentially being made fun of in this film, and everything around you comes crashing down, and you get these beautiful moments of just people thinking, what the fuck are we doing here, when that scene plays out. And it's definitely one of the most memorable scenes when they're faced with it, their immediate reactions. And I really think it made the film. I think a scene like that almost has to be put in because it shows a sense of, I guess, self, like they know what they're doing. They realize what they're doing's wrong, and yet they're still taking that approach. Um, I'm trying to put my finger on the word, but I think you know what I'm trying to say, Matt.
Yeah, I just remember like Stoffer, the main guy, he just like gets really pissed and kind of storms away. Um, but yeah, and the best way maybe I can describe it is they're not really acting at all. Like his goal is is not to have these people be actors and to not have them like try and dig in to get these to their like inner emotions and bring them out to like in a fake way. Like he's not setting up these fake scenes that are just for a movie. He's trying to get them to have he's trying to get their real reactions. And so I think his goal is to have them not act, to maybe like do the opposite, to create these situations that bring out a different sense of acting that's not acting, but it's like a reality. It's like someone um just like setting up a fake scenario and putting these real people, well, it's not even a fake scenario, but he's setting up these scenarios and he's putting these real people in it, and he's just documenting the aftermath. um and another thing that I just remember that makes me think that this is real, you know, besides the Dogma 95 rules, which really make every Dogma 95 film seem real, is I read that that Lars von Trier's parents were they worked for whatever ministry in Denmark that took care of or like housed mentally challenged people. And that makes me think that because I remember they're selling the house, they're trying to sell this house. And it's like every time they bring someone over to sell the house, they have to act like idiots, and they basically make them not. They basically try and get them away from buying the house. Um, and it makes me think that maybe this was like the real property that his parents owned, and he just went there and used it for this purpose. So it's all very like the whole movie has this like mystique to it, this like mystery that I find really intriguing. And I there's not really much of any other movies that kind of do it the same way.
I completely agree, especially with the stakes being as high. I would say, like we brought up a couple examples of where situations could have got really hairy if they were playing it straight and the people outside that they interact with were out of the loop. It really could have got very bad for a few people. And I want to touch on something you mentioned about how he doesn't want them to act and just kind of like be in the actual moment. And I think it is coincidental that that also kind of mirrors the way that the leader of this community kind of looks at when it comes to being an idiot, and that like they have to find their true inner idiot. And I just think there's something really interesting to that where it's like, so you're acting mentally challenged, okay, but it's like he wants it to come from a genuine place. And it's like the mythos and like what they're trying to accomplish with this all, I find to be really interesting myself. You know what I mean? Like he wants it to come from a genuine place, and it's almost as though in doing so you can achieve this higher level of being. And I do really find it interesting.
Yeah, I feel like it's hard to talk like it because it's when you say you try and find your inner idiot, like it's hard to really explain in words what he's getting at, and I think it's very interpretive. I don't think that there's a right answer, but I and this is a weird comparison, but it's just what I thought of. Is like when you're meditating, which I don't really do. I just have heard about it. You're supposed to like do as much as you can to push out any thought that you have. You're supposed to try and keep your mind in a blank state. And I imagine doing that's really hard because, not thinking about anything is more challenging than I think a lot of people realize. And in that same way, he is like trying to get them to lose all sense of how they normally act, like how you normally go about living your life. And he's trying to make them access this part of them that doesn't really exist. Because, if, because you're not mentally challenged like that, then you aren't. And the people that really are acting like that and they can't help themselves. Like that's just how they are. And so he's trying to like get people to access this part of them that maybe exists, maybe doesn't. And yeah, it's just it's hard to discuss, but it's like a very interesting thing he's going for. And I think it's really unlike any other movie at all. Like most, weird movies, like you can compare them to something, but I feel like this is like a weird like acting type of like workshop he's like doing with these people. And it's just very it's aimless. Like it doesn't feel like there's a point to the whole thing at all, which is another weird thing. And then also he's also seems to be commenting on like the way society treats mentally challenged people. Like they got away with doing all this bullshit because these people believed they were mentally challenged, and because they were, it's okay. Like I'm thinking of the scene where they sell them that worthless candle for like $50. They try and sell it to them like $50. And then the people are just like, okay, we're going to accept it. And it's essentially they're accepting it because they feel bad for them. And that's another moment where Stoffer gets really mad. I remember after they do that door-to-door sale and that lady, they basically convince her to buy it because they want to make her feel bad for them. And then after that, he like wants to quit. Like it's and it's he's like Lars von Trier is like trying to touch on this weird like societal like construct of, on one hand, we do need to treat these people more, nicely because they really like actual mentally challenged people don't have the capabilities to, act in the way that everyone else does. But at the same time, it's like he's commenting that maybe not that it's wrong to treat them like this, but he's like making the viewer aware that this is something people do. And because I feel like, when you treat someone that's mentally challenged in a way that, everyone does, like in a more nice, caring manner, you don't really think about how that's weird. It's just kind of like that's what you do. Like, and you know what I mean?
I do. And so what, like how I'm kind of gonna parallel it to, I think something that people, and I think what you said absolutely makes sense to me, but how it kind of compares to a scenario that I think we're all somewhat familiar with, but we maybe don't even notice, is that people will kind of point out the hypocrisy or the inherent racism of people who they try to treat other races maybe more nicely in their own minds, but people will say, well, like but you're treating them differently. And it's almost as though Von Trier is trying to paint or illustrate that with the idiots, in that, like you said, it seems like a necessary, like, nicety of society that you can't just treat them like how you would treat any other person that you come across. But he's trying to shine a mirror at that and say, like, look, in a way you're kind of like pushing them down the totem pole, maybe. Like, do you know what I'm saying? I feel like we're on the same road and I'm just saying it differently than you, but does that comparison make sense to you, I guess?
No, exactly. I think that is a good comparison. Like if you like I think the race is a good parallel. So I think that in my mind, like people who have like traveled the world, for example, and have really come across and experienced like different cultures and different races, they have a more genuine feeling that everyone they are like the most unracist people in my mind because they like really cultured people can go to other places and they know that everyone is just a human being, like that they have a genuine appreciation for these other people and they know that they are not really any different from themselves, and then they treat them accordingly, which is to just treat them like you would, someone of your own race or someone of your own culture. Whereas I feel like a lot of people who maybe haven't experienced other cultures and really haven't befriended or gotten to know people of all different races, they might say that or they have this viewpoint that like almost like we need to baby or like treat other races like for example like an American would treat like they might think of, oh, like all these African people, like poor them, like they don't have any of this great technology we have, and so we need to give them funding, and we need to really help them because they're so much like lower on this like hypothetical hierarchy than we are. And then they treat them accordingly, by trying to um just do all these things that it's comes off as being good natured, but in a way, it's like you're doing it because you feel like they're lesser than you. And I feel like that definitely is one of the points that he's trying to make with this movie is that, are you really going to treat these people like lesser than you? Like, are you really going to just say, okay, I'll waste $50 on this thing that's worth nothing instead of denying them and treating them like you would a regular person who came to your door trying to essentially scam you? Like, why do we do this? Like, why is there this difference in the way we treat people? I think that's a interesting thing that maybe he didn't even intend to get across with this movie, but it definitely was something I thought a lot about.
Yeah, I'm completely with you. And it shines a very bright light on like an internal guilt that I think people feel when they're around mentally challenged people, and just a general discomfort is something else that I think you get from a lot of the people. And I think those feelings are very true for a lot of people who don't spend time frequently around mentally disabled people. And this film very clearly kind of really highlights that.
Yeah, like I this is a weird thing to bring up, but I remember I don't know what podcast it was, but I'm forgetting the comedian's name, but he talks about how he coached a Special Olympics basketball team, and they're asking him questions about it, and I think he's being serious here, not just making a joke when he's saying like how this basketball team was like one of the horniest like people he's ever met. Like all these guys were talking about boobs and stuff, and that's just like not something that you would regularly think of mentally challenged people doing, because the way people perceive them is if like they are just these like they're more like an animal where you need to care for it, and like they don't have any genuine human feelings, like they wouldn't view people sexually because they just don't have that capability. Whereas I feel like oftentimes that's wrong, and oftentimes they probably are just they're a lot more normal, they have a lot more normal human feelings and perceptions than people want to make them out to have.
So you sparked my memory. This is one of the two, I think, remaining scenes that really need to be covered for this film because I think they're maybe the most memorable and most impactful. But we have the gangbang, which shows full penetration sex, and something that can be easily like dismissible, but where it ends and how this plays into a major through line is that we get a genuine love connection between two of the people in this commune. And this is, I think, one of the moments in this movie that really made this film seem like more uplifting or happier, is that there was like a real love in this film, and it was found in one of the most strange ways ever. But it's like something was being communicated when you leave all pretenses away and you're just completely comfortable in being vulnerable and outwardly like trying to show this like a more deplorable side of your nature, and that you're acting like in a politically incorrect manner, that you're able to actually love each other for who you are in those real moments in between. And I just like, maybe I'm stupid for having found that scene to be so touching, and the scene where they're kind of torn apart to be so emotional, but I loved that element of it, and it gave this film so much more emotional depth than I was prepared for going in.
Yeah, I didn't get that from that scene, but I can see where you're coming from. One of the things it just shows like this how interpretive this is. But yeah, because that and combined with like when that girl's dad comes and takes her away, I feel like toward by the end they have like formed this group, and this is also probably reading into the movie, maybe in my own interpretation, but I feel like it's this maybe this like commentary in a sense on like groups and like tribalism. Like all these people have been getting together, presumably for at least a few weeks to film this movie. And he, like Lars von Trier, can get them into this state of mind where, to act like they're inner idiots. And by the end, it's like they really it's like it becomes a reality, like a real thing. Like at least as a viewer, I feel like they have come together as a group by the end. And while they do some of them seem a little sick of this whole thing, they it's like it has become a part of them. And I know they say at the end, like, something along the lines of like, don't be afraid to access your inner idiot, like going forward in your life. I feel like it is like maybe it is something that really resonated when sat with the actors as they went through with their real life. But I feel like it would be one of those things where you can always kind of go back and like access this like inner idiot that you got from working on this movie. And it's this like weird kind of religious spiritual thing.
Yeah, I do think it is, at least like how they were trying to portray it in the film, is that it is something that's transcendent, like a religious experience, how you mentioned. And what I also think the film was going for, that I think is illustrated probably the best in the ending when the newest member goes to her family, is like that you're so comfortable in risking losing everything that you value, because she goes to her family, and it's very, very uncomfortable because she and her husband had just lost a son, and in her grief joins this group, and just so happens that like the last challenge, or the test of wills, so to speak, is to kind of put everything at risk by acting like an idiot where it actually matters. And the newest member is the only one to really put anything at stake, and does so with her grieving family, which it just makes for this huge emotional climax to the film. But I think it captures what the spirit of the group was at the end of it. What do you think, Matt?
Yeah, on a second watch, that ending hit definitely harder than the first, just because I think the first time I was so caught up in trying to figure out like what this movie even was. But on the second watch, I figured that she is kind of the main character in a way, and it's because they just kind of get her to come along with them at the opening scene, and then in the end, it's like this like terrible scenario. Like I feel like that ending part where she comes in and she's greeted by her husband or former husband's family members, and it's like this extremely serious, sad situation, which reminds me of, honestly, the ending reminds me of most Lars von Trier films. In a sense, it feels very much like that. But then it's like she starts acting like an idiot, and it's like and I was thinking, like, what is the meaning? Like, couldn't really figure it out. Besides that, she's accessing her inner idiot. She has taken, obviously, learned something from the group. But in my mind, I still can't figure out if what the point is, and if there might not even be a point at all. It might just be like an absurdist, like it. Well, what do you think?
So I'm gonna spitball here. I do think that the film explores the entirety of it, in that I think there's flaws in the system, but and I'm going to compare this to something that has really negative aspects on your life, but in a way, this kind of mentality does too, and then kind of circle back to, I guess, what the benefit or what the breakthrough is supposed to be. But a lot of people will say that, like, when you become an addict, if you're a heroin addict, methamphetamine, any like serious life gripping addiction, is that it kind of, it brings down the complexity of your life to basically where we're generally at a 10, no matter, I mean, unless your life is just completely like a very easy ride. But for the majority of people, our lives feel very, very complex, and just getting through the dullness of paying bills and all of that stuff, it still adds a complexity to our lives. But with drug addicts, your life becomes just, how do I get drugs so I can get high, rinse and repeat. Okay. And, if there are drug addicts listening to this, maybe I'm missing it, but that's like, you don't worry about your past pains. You don't worry about your strained relationships. A lot of things that can bring you tremendous inner turmoil kind of just get wiped off the table when your life is simplified to get drugs, take drugs. Okay. And I feel like the idiots is trying to not emulate the negative aspects of that, but they're trying to just bring life down to its most simplistic level. And it serves as a means of her to get through her grief, because it's like, instead of thinking of how people are reacting to how she's grieving, she's able to just, like in a meditative state, how you kind of mentioned, just completely clear her mind and not focus on anything else besides this group, and just being the inner idiot. It's just attempting to bring your life to its most simplistic form without wondering and focusing on all of the complexities around us. And that's, I think, the essence of what the leader is trying to accomplish. And I think she, in doing that, and she's not able to fully commit, but she commits more than anyone. It's not focus on the noise, just be in this moment, completely clear of mind, and just be. And I do think you can poke holes in that, but I do think that there's something brilliant and beautiful in that.
Uh, that really resonated with me, actually. Like, that is not something I thought about at all. And coming, from someone, I have had experiences with addiction myself, and I find that what you said is very true. Um, and my way of characterizing it would be like an escape from reality. Um, and when people are going through grief like that, like that is, as someone who has been addicted to things, that would be the first place I would want to go, because like you were saying, it's like you are, I mean, escaping from reality is like the best way to put it, but it's just something that will make you feel good in that instant. And a lot of the times the feeling you get, from like doing certain drugs, but also, and he's making the parallel here to being an idiot. It's like everything just washes away for that moment, and that is what you crave. And in a way, that simple feeling you get, and the ability when you do those things like taking drugs or accessing an inner idiot, you can just get rid of anxiety and thoughts about other everything else. And so I think that, what you just said, like I said, I hadn't thought about that at all, but I think now I think that's exactly right what he was going for, because it kind of ties in with all this religious type things, because religion, in my opinion, is another way to escape. It's oftentimes it's all about, escaping from the thought of, for example, like impending death or doom, or you just had something horrible or tragic happen in your life, and you don't want your thoughts to be going crazy and all over the place. And so maybe I should just, divert to doing this because it will make me feel better. And I feel like that idiot is kind of like maybe he's trying to make that like a different version of like a religion, or a drug addiction. So yeah, I thought that was a great thought, and it kind of changed my perspective on the movie a little bit, made me appreciate it a little more.
Yeah, I'm very glad that you appreciated it, and I think that what you said about religion tracks a lot too. And I don't think people necessarily think of it in the same manner, but I think what you said is very based in realism. It's something to just quell or quiet the moment and quell our fears. And I think that's why it attracts so many people, and people will go there in their darkest moments just to kind of simplify how they're looking at life. And I think
Yeah,
that tracks perfectly with the idiots, and I think that's why it feels very much like a cult or like an early religion. The idiots, that little community of them.
yeah, yeah. Because you think, if your son dies, if you're religious already, you're probably going to be spending a lot more time praying and at church, and if you were formerly, like a heroin addict, you might start seeking out heroin again.
Exactly. Matt, I want to ask you, are there any additional tidbits you want to touch on with the idiots before we get to our rating?
Oh no, I just want to make, one more point, is that why I think this movie is so different and so unique and interesting is that, we've been having this serious conversation about the movie, and at the same time it's just so incredibly absurd because the movie is about going around and acting like you're retarded. And it's just like, it exists on different levels to where that's so like crazy. And it's terrible, it's offensive, and it's funny in a weird way. It's just like, I don't know. Like, this movie is just very, very cool. Very weird.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think I said this earlier, but you feel upset. You feel, I felt upset, angry. I was laughing. I felt like very happy, very sad. And the emotional weight behind this film, behind an idea that is absurd and maybe the most absurd movie idea of all time, is so tremendously unexpected. And this is a film so worth watching. If you're willing and a ready audience member to try something completely out of the norm, this is a film that has, I think it's so rewarding and so much more rewarding than you would ever imagine.
Yeah, yeah, definitely more than you would imagine from, the synopsis.
I gave this a 4 out of 5, and I think it could even warrant a higher rating for me if I were to rewatch this. What would you rate this film? I know it's a very difficult film to rate because I think, like you had said previously, it's so unlike anything else.
So I initially gave it on my first watch of 5 stars, and it was one of my favorites. And when I rewatched it, I I moved it down to 4.5 because I didn't enjoy the experience as much. And I thought, it's definitely because the part of the reason why it's so interesting is like the first watch, it just surprises you. It's very shocking. And usually those types of movies are great on the first watch more than they are on the rewatches. But after our discussion, I think I had to move it back up to a 5 because I really didn't like delve into it this deeply in my mind before. And now I feel like it's just such a unique film that I think in my mind it's definitely a favorite. It's a movie I'll never forget. And I think it's always will live up there um, for me as something truly remarkable.
I completely agree. The next film we're going to talk about, immediate reaction. I'm not going to give the rating, but I will say is not a very high rating. But I will say I feel like once we're able to kind of touch upon some of this stuff, I think I might look at it with even more appreciation. I certainly appreciated what it was going for. And I think what John Waters does right out of the gates with Pink Flamingo is he is able to create a movie star, like a classic silent movie era star, like any movie star of their time in Divine right away. That in and of itself, before we even get to the outrageous scenes, I think is something that maybe gets overlooked in this film. But he makes Divine just feel like a special character in this movie universe.
Yeah, and Divine, I don't know if how many other John Waters movies you've seen, but I've seen a number of others with Divine in it, and um, she's very much the same in all the movies. Like she kind of keeps a very similar personality. To me, it's very funny the way she talks, and all the cast of characters are hilarious. And yeah, it's like this diva type of character, but you would never, it's obviously something you would never see in like a silent film because this is one of the first, I mean, times I can ever think of someone who's, cross dressing, someone who's in drag is treated like like a Marilyn Monroe type. Like, obviously, she doesn't act like Marilyn Monroe, but like the way the movie is, like depicts her is like this, like enchanting, like, star, which I think is it's funny and at the same time it's progressive in a way and it's just very different, just like the idiots, you're seeing something here that you never really saw before John Waters.
Yeah, I completely agree. And this is just a little known tidbit. First of all, just to your point, this is the first John Waters film I'd ever seen, and I haven't gotten the opportunity to watch any more yet. But I looked into John Waters a little bit after this film, and him and Divine went to high school together, and that's how she became like a main fixture of a lot of his films, which I just find to be very interesting because she becomes this kind of like pop culture icon in a sense, and was not like, it just fits perfectly within the John Waters universe because she was a relative unknown, has the uphill climb of being a crossdresser in the 70s and prior, and somehow becomes this cult classic hero. I just find all of that to be extremely interesting.
Yeah, and in the other movies where they have Divine and a very similar cast of Pink Flamingos, like Multiple Maniacs, Polyester, and Female Trouble are the ones I could think of. I'm guessing the other cast members, like for example, the lady who lives in the crib in Pink Flamingos, she's in all these other movies as well. I'm assuming that these are people John Waters knew, maybe from high school or some other place, and they're kind of like an acting troupe. Like you see a lot of directors have their groups that they continually use throughout their films. A lot of the characters in Pink Flamingos are present in a lot of his other movies too. Um, and from my research, are very genuine. Like, they really were outcasts in real life. They were, like the type of people who were drug users. They lived on the fringes of society. They were like rebels. And I think that his movies really capture that spirit.
Absolutely. And I know we had touched upon this earlier, but it bears repeating, at least in my mind, that it takes the negative outlook that had been placed upon these people as outcasts, that because of what makes them different, they should be excluded, and celebrates them in this film. And it wears it like a badge of honor, and even like pushes up the volume to an extreme to where like they become cannibals, they become murderers. It's almost like they're playing into the kind of perspective that I guess the mainstream people had looked upon them with. Does that kind of make sense? And do so makes it a satirical film.
Exactly. And that's why I find this movie and other ones so hilarious. My favorite of his is Multiple Maniacs, which I believe is his debut. And that one is more extreme than this one in the sense of being satirical. Like I think one of the opening scenes they have their group and Divine putting on this like little circus show where they're doing all these like gross and crazy things and they have all these like regular 70s white people come and watch and they're all so disgusted by it and then I think they might end up like shooting them or something. It's all very ridiculous and they're making fun of themselves in a way that like you were saying like they would be perceived like this is what normal 70s Americana thinks these people are doing in their free time. They think they're going around like raping and murdering people and like kidnapping children. They think that this is, and so they like play on those perceptions and they just exaggerate them. And I love that kind of humor, like the satirical, dark satire type of stuff. So the movies movies I can laugh at. I usually don't genuinely laugh at a lot of movies, but ones like this I think are hilarious because another thing I think they do is they kind of have that the way they talk is very much like a play also like a 50s movie where the actors and actresses are very much like pronunciating their words,
Mm.
and it's like a drama, and it kind of feels fake, kind of feels a little bit like a play. And I in my mind that's also playing off this this like at least back, 50 years ago, how people were supposed to act and how they talked, and they're kind of using the way they talk to kind of like exaggerate their what they're doing, and like exaggerate how people perceive them, or you know what I'm getting at.
Yeah, I hadn't put that together in my mind yet, but that tracks so very well because when I'm first watching it, I'm trying to wrap my brain around it, and I felt like he's maybe trying to get them to act more like amateurs, or maybe that's the best that they can do, and that starts to kind of fade as you get later into this movie and you understand that it is very intentional. And I really didn't realize it, but like you said, they're projecting very well, they're enunciating, and what you said I think completely makes sense and was exactly what they were trying to create, the parallel within the minds of the audience of for the actors. And another little kind of teeny tiny aspect that definitely fits within this category is the narrator having this very over the top, I will assume Baltimore accent was, I don't know why it intrigued me so much or why I enjoyed it, but I just did. And it might have been something that you didn't really register for you, but just for me, like I can't emulate the accent myself, but it made me want to just kind of talk in that accent because I found it humorous that they had a narrator, which generally in a lot of films that utilize that in the film, you want it to be someone with a crisp voice, enunciates very well, almost a la what the actors were doing. That's why Morgan Freeman has had a job for like 1,000 films that he doesn't even have to actually be in the film to be included in. But I just found it very interesting to they also kind of flip that on its head as well.
Yeah, yeah, because a good parallel in my mind is you think there's this other movie that he made, Polyester, and it's like kind of this, it's supposed to be like the perfect suburban family, but then like their son is like a murderer and like a foot fetishist, and like the husband is like this photographer who is like this really like messed up guy. And so it's like taking like like think of like a a suburban regular show, like a Friends TV show or Full House, and it's like taking these like perfect um or what's deemed to be like a perfect family, and it's like they're keeping the like they act, like the way they talk and the way they act is like emulating this family, but then they just do this messed up stuff that you would never see in like one of these genuine like a Friends or a Full House. And they just it's and I just think that's so funny because it's just like playing off of that, um making fun of, in a way, like that normal, everything is so perfect in this household type of feel that you get from a lot of shows. And it's in a way speaking to a reality, in my opinion, because you see these like perfect looking families on maybe like social media or in TV shows, and a lot of the times if you dig a little deeper, or something comes out that maybe the dad was like molesting the son's or daughter's friends, or like something really dark was happening in that family, and that's the part that's never revealed. And so I just that whole like how all of that ties together is something I've always really like enjoyed seeing movies about, you know, because it makes me laugh, and then there's like this extra dimension to it that I provokes my thoughts and all that stuff.
I really liked what you touched upon because you know it almost seems like a running joke when you'll see news will break and it's like U.S. senator exposed in whatever, you know, pedophile ring or something absolutely ludicrous. Like these people in society that we put a lot of respect in, that we think are outstanding citizens or just have these very normal lives. Oftentimes it'll come out, you know, how despicable they can be behind the scenes. And it sounds like that film certainly it takes the Pink Flamingos and goes to the other side of the spectrum for it, where it's like, okay, with Pink Flamingos, this is what you think we do, and we're gonna play into that. Whereas it sounds polyester is like you think these, you know, all these households to be like the white pillar of what the nation should be like, and lo and behold, behind the scenes, oftentimes they're even worse than how you depict these outcasts to be. And I think that's a really interesting dichotomy to build up, because I think and it would be insane and very closed-minded to think that just because someone is in these fringe communities or even just now widely accepted communities, that their lives are more despicable or deplorable, or that they are capable of evil at a more accelerated rate than people who would be described as quote unquote more normal. And I really like that he explores that dichotomy in this film and in that film.
Yeah, he definitely and you know, you just know that, you know, while these people were outcasts, they probably, or they definitely, they're just, you know, regular people at their heart. They probably had a lot of fun making pink flamingos and how ridiculous it was. You know, I just think about, you know, them making this movie. I'm I imagine most of them wanted to just do it because they probably just thought it was funny, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And at the time, it was very, you know, I feel like nowadays it's much more accepted. It's one of those films that's become a cult classic, and people can look back on it and laugh. But I think it's one of those movies that was, when it was released, it was just seen as so horrible, you know, like I'm trying to think of like a current day society, a, a societal like opinion surrounding things, where if you released something right now and it was just seen as so offensive, but in 30, 40 years people are probably going to look back on it. I can't think of an exact movie, but I know you probably know what I'm getting at. Like, it's one of those things where it ages with time, and as time progresses, people are, they like, and like views change and the world changes. People become less upset about like a current thing, and stuff that uh, seems offensive now. Later on, people can look back and be like, you know, this is kind of funny. Like, why were we so up in arms about this? Um, it's one of those movies that I think ages well instead of poorly, because of just mainly because of the satire and the way it pokes fun at stuff. Um, yeah.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, this it's a film that would have certainly evolved. I think it becomes I it's hard to even determine, but I would imagine it's more accessible for people now, and having lived in a world where you can kind of see the the parody in it all. Whereas maybe then it could have very easily went over people's head. But to another point that you made, I think you have to really highlight how daring a film this would have been to release in 1972, and the immense amount of respect that I have for someone who was just willing to really take a shot creatively. So I very much respect both of those things, and I wonder if he even realized like how ahead of the curve he was, and that this would be a film that would be a lot more accessible in like 50 years later.
I've seen some interviews with him, and I don't get that feeling. He seems like he really enjoys being like an outcast and a rebel and doing stuff that is like, subverts expectations or is just so out, far out that no one can really, or a lot of people don't really jive with it at the time. Like if you release this movie nowadays, I think just because of the access people have to, horrible things to watch, like you can go online and watch real torture videos. You can watch people like spreading their assholes like he does in this movie. And I think back then, like that was just something that you didn't see. The back then, I think this was in the early 70s, like movies that showed extreme violence, like Peck and Paw, were just starting to become a thing. Like before that, movies were much more of a like how I was saying earlier, the studios made sure um, those types of things didn't get into the film. Like you would never go to a movie and see anywhere close to these types of things that you're seeing in this movie. So it was just very, very I don't know if ahead of its time is the right word though, but it's just very offensive in a way that you couldn't be offensive like that back then. And so yeah, he was definitely taking some risks um, by making this because I imagine a ton of people were pissed about this movie when it came out. Like wanting to ban this movie. I'm sure of it.
Oh, absolutely. And I'm sure we will go through all of the key scenes that are very much played to purely, be obscene. And with my point about being ahead of its time is that which kind of mirrors something that you had said, is I think today people, more of a percentage of mainstream audiences, I think, are able to actually put together what Waters was trying to say. Whereas I feel like at the time that this released, I feel there would have been a much smaller percentage that would be able to kind of decipher what his messaging or what his approach, what themes he was actually trying to explore.
Yeah, yeah. Like okay, here's an example, and this is obviously going to be a bad example because it's pretty offensive, but think of a movie if it was released nowadays that was extremely racist towards black people, and then compare that to a movies in the 40s and 50s that were made that were racist towards black people. Back then, people kind of let that thing slide, that type of thing slide more. Whereas nowadays, that would be the most offensive type of movie you could release.
Mm.
That's how I try to. That's how I try and think of it in my mind because you got to think of the times people were living in, and you got to think of something now that would just be so offensive that everyone would hate it. It would have the kind of reviews on Letterboxd where you got the half star super high and then you got the 5-star kind of high, and it's just so controversial. But then 20, 30 years from now, you might be able to look back on it and be like, it was saying something more than like just you were reacting to it at the time negatively, but hindsight, when you're looking back in the past, you kind of see more what it's going for because your emotions of anger and being offended aren't so present anymore.
That's very true. And I think like the hearts being in it, I think that's a very good detail to kind of add. Is that I think a lot of people, I wonder how like anti gay people were. And I think they were very, very anti gay. It's tough to tell in the 70s. I know, like, obviously, there was a large hippie culture and people who were a lot more free minded when it came to that. But the fact that there are now parades, there's an entire Pride Month, and gay marriage being legalized, I don't think it's. I'm not going out on a limb by saying it's a lot more socially acceptable as it was back then. What I also find,
Yeah.
oh, I'm sorry, go ahead, Matt.
Oh no, I was just gonna say I saw John Waters in an interview once, and he was saying how he hated how mainstream it's become because of how much he enjoyed being an outcast back then, how he thought it was more fun. And I think that, is right in line with this movie.
Let me, and this is kind of out of left field. There is a similarity that if you're familiar with this character, you'll definitely get right away. But there's a man by the name of Gigi Allen who passed away. I want to say in the 80s, but I could be a decade off, more or less. It was this extreme underground punk band where he would injure himself on stage, he would defecate on stage, and he was so much trying to be inaccessible that it attracted people to be a part of the know. And it seems like there is a parallel between the artistry that Gigi Allen was trying to make and what John Waters has made with Pink Flamingos. Are you aware, have you ever heard of Gigi Allen, and if so, or just from my explanation, does that kind of track with you as well?
Yes, I do not know much about him, but I have heard of him, and I see exactly what you're going for there. He was in a way trying to be so. I mean, I think I might have heard of him from maybe some kind of Reddit thread that was talking about like some of the most crazy or messed up individuals to ever live. And I think he was like the most upvoted. And I looked into his history a little, and I was just amazed how I had never really heard of anyone like this. Like, this is it seemed to be a person that was just, I don't know. I'll let you do the explaining, but he basically was trying to be like the filthiest person alive, just like this movie.
Yeah, that's a very good explanation. Yeah, like he was so aggressive in nature. It seemed like he was trying to push people away. And he would a lot of times have performances where he wanted to get arrested. He wanted to clear out all of the audience. He didn't want people to just stumble upon his shows and become a fan. Like, he wanted only the truly devout people to stick with him. And it just seems to very much tie in with what you said you had heard from John Waters, where he doesn't like how mainstream all of these subversive topics that he would push have become nowadays, much like how Gigi Allen, if it was now in vogue to throw shit at people, he would try to go the other direction to become the outcast again. And for whatever reason, that it does really speak to me, and I think it's just I don't know what it is necessarily, but it's very alluring. The ability to be disliked and not care at all what people think of you, to the point where you're willing to make them dislike you intentionally. So it just it speaks to me.
Yeah, yeah, that kind of stuff draws me into like the people who can be so contrarian. I It's almost like in my mind they are, to me it's like they're not a human. It's like they've achieved this state of mind. What people always say, when you get older, like one of the best things is you stop caring about what other people think. And a lot of times people's advice, just in life generally, is to not care what other people think. I think that's good advice because I think that helps you access your true genuine self. But then you get people like this who it's like you would have to tell these people, hey, maybe you should care a little bit about what other people think, because they are so like far on the other end of the spectrum. And for whatever reason, I can't really explain it, but there's like a respect that I have, and I think a lot of people have, for those types of people. Don't know why. It's just like you just respect them a lot.
I definitely I fall into that camp of respecting, because I think, you know, younger adults like ourselves, it is so you can't help but fall into the caring what other people think. And it's a trait that I wish I had more of. And to see someone just so flagrantly have it in spades where they don't give a fuck, I it's you know I definitely think I envy that. I think this film also, and this is ultimately the tie-in with Gigi Allen, how he would throw fecal matter and also eat it. One of the most infamous scenes in this film, something that I think people who very vaguely know of John Waters would probably be aware, that the very, very end of this film, Divine eats dog feces, and John Waters has confirmed this to be true, like that it was legitimately dog feces. I'm not 100% sure. I feel like there's a possibility he's just kind of keeping that story going for the mystique of this film. But this is a film that is fraught with scenes like that, though I think that might be the most absurd of all of those scenes.
Yep, I that was when we started talking about scenes, that was the one I wanted to mention first, because uh, aside from one other, which we get to it a little bit, that one probably left me with the most like shock, I would say, and like being stunned. And this is the reason why. And it's because, some other movies, they allegedly eat, poop, like in Sallow, but you kind of get a feeling that it's not really like actual poop. And then in this movie, I mean, I don't know what you've read about how it might not be real, but to me it looked extremely real, just because you literally see the dog like take a shit, and then you just see Divine pick it up and eat it. And I feel like it just, to me, felt like, where would the editing trick be to make that not real? Because to make it not real, you would just have something that looks like it just sitting there and then you eat it, but you literally see the dog poop it out.
This is, and like I said, John Waters has on the record said it is real. The only, I guess, the inkling of me that doesn't believe it, and I'm on the fence, right? I'm probably like 60, it's real, 40, it's not, is that there is a cut. So you, like you said, you see a dog take a shit, and there's a cut, and then Divine picks it up and eats it. And that's what has allowed for an essence of maybe it's not real. But again, with everything that does take place in this film, I wouldn't be surprised either way.
Yeah, yeah. I guess I just forgot about the cut. Yeah, to me, it just looked very, very real. And I with all this stuff, with how they were as real people, and the fact that these aren't exactly hired actors. These are friends of the director. I wouldn't be surprised if it was real at all. Yeah.
Divine, what I will say, probably the best case for it being real is Divine's reaction as
Yeah.
she's eating.
It looks pretty genuine.
Yeah. And I think that it really is kind of telling where it's like this was, and it's going to be a really weird way to describe it, but in Waters' mind, and probably everyone on the cast and crew is like, this is a magical moment to almost make this film live on in infamy for years to come, because it's really thematically not important to the storyline of the film, and it's tagged on to the end, and yet it is perhaps the scene that has lived on the most, or is the most thought of and most talked about, and it feels like lightning in a bottle.
Yeah, yeah. It's not, it's just tacked on to the end. It's not part of the other like parts that are part of the storyline. So I feel like maybe they were just like, hey, like on the last day of shooting, you should just go eat this, let this dog take a shit and then eat it. And I feel like they were just like, okay, let's do it. Another one that really bothered me that I forgot about from the first watch was the chicken part.
Yes, I read the chicken does actually die. Did you hear that as well?
Oh, that's kind of messed up. No, I didn't know that.
Yeah, unfortunately, and I want to double check that before I propagate it, but apparently a chicken does die during that scene, which makes it a little bit more real, so to speak.
Yeah, and I mean, you can kind of tell from watching it also that it's that he's really doing that with the chicken. He's really like that's, and it looks like it really probably hurt.
I want to ask you. This is a really weird question, but okay. So, so that scene, it actually hurt the actor, the female actress, and I think the male actor, and it does end up killing the chicken. It seemed very real. I don't know if that is another kind of mythos added in, but that's what Google says. Super really weird question, but I think it's just to kind of show how far removed from reality this film was. And I would have to think there's an actual person who was walking their dog prior to that scene if everything is real. I mean, why would someone on the cast and crew be like walking their dog for that scene? But how, imagine you're in real life, someone's filming, and your dog goes number two, and then you see a person pick it up and eat it. Like, would you be upset? Would you want to get as far away as possible? I mean, how would you envision yourself reacting to something like that in real life?
I would be getting far away from that person.
Another scene, because it was so unexpected, and I probably should have thought it would be possible, but it just came out of left field, was the fellatio scene. There's a tremendous amount of nudity in this, but I think them crossing that line to actually showing like unsimulated sex was one of the most shocking scenes for me, because I had heard of the dog shit scene. The chicken scene was pretty raw. I thought it to be fake, so it didn't register with me while I was watching it. But the fellatio scene actually was the most shocking scene I watched in like as I was watching it.
Yeah, for me, the chicken one was the most upsetting as because if I remember right, they don't really cut, and so you kind of and it's just that one view, and you see everything. Like you see like him on top of where you see him moving the chicken around, and I was like, wow, this is real. Like there's no way you can't fake this. Like that's a real chicken. Like he's really like shoving the beak up there. Like she's probably really bleeding. I was trying to figure out in my mind how it was fake. I was like, I just don't think it can be. But yeah, no, that one too was the other one uh, where she's giving him a blowjob, and it's also supposed to be I forget how they're supposed to be related. Like that's supposed to be like her
Yeah,
son or something,
yeah,
and which adds a whole other level of it of messed up. And then I when she's started doing that, I was like, okay, wow, like she's really just doing it, like unsimulated, like this is real. Yeah, that one shocked me, and these images of this stuff happening like lives in my mind. Like I could picture it perfectly right now, which is not great, but at the same time it's like it works for a very memorable movie.
yeah. And I guess to your point, and I think it's much, much more disturbing now. I didn't realize like even what they were trying to portray and what actually happened during the chicken scene. I just thought he had like the chicken in between them and was like twisting its head. And I guess I didn't have my eyes in the right spot, but so he was penetrating Cookie with the head of the chicken, and
Yep.
I didn't realize that, and that makes it infinitely more fucked up than I first thought.
Yeah, yeah. I don't think, just like you, I don't think on the first watch it resonated with me as much because I didn't remember it at all. And then when I watched it on the rewatch, I was like, God, like, I kind of had to look away a little.
Understandably so. Yeah, if I were to watch that again, I think I would too. I thought, yeah, I don't know what the fuck I thought. I didn't think that was what was going on, but yes, that is incredibly messed up and takes the. I mean, divine eating shit or being Cookie and having that happen to you. I don't know. Both of those are definitely going to stick with you for a very long time, honestly. I mean, it's commitment to the role, I will say.
Yeah, a lot of commitment. And I have to say, like, the other John Waters movies I've seen, like, none of them go as far as Pink Flamingos. Like, this is his most viewed movie on Letterboxd for a reason. It's like one of those movies where people will be like, "Have you ever seen Pink Flamingos?" And then they start naming off like, "Oh, there's someone like fuck someone with a chicken, like they eat dog poop." Like you could just start naming off all these crazy things that you would never see in a movie, and they're all in this same movie. I feel like part of the goal was to make like the most messed up, disturbing movie possible. And I think in my mind, he sat around thinking of all these, like, what can we do to really disturb the viewer?
Yeah. And I just think it's such an interesting aspect of people who consume media, especially movies, but even books too, that a lot of its allure will come from being disturbing. And like we had said, it's sometimes will be films that we seek out because it's so disturbing. A film I have not seen, or a couple films. One is a Serbian film, which I feel like 99% of viewers have gone out of their way to watch that, not for its artistic merit, but for how disturbing it is. And then I think a film that blends the two is one you had brought up in being Sallow or 120 Days of Sodom. And I feel like this film, like Sallow, is able to interweave artistry into a very interesting element of film, and that just being to disturb the audience. I find it so intriguing why it has so much allure for people like me, and why people want to seek out those films. It's just psychologically being able to kind of pinpoint what makes us seek that stuff out. I find to be really interesting.
Yeah, yeah, it's I think it's the whole same thing. People like the macabre, like people like disturbing stuff. Like I myself and lots of people love crime stories. And like all the comments in a crime story, like if it's posted on social media, will just be, people talking about how terrible and horrible it is. But people get addicted to these types of things. Not like watching pink flamingos over and over or anything, but in the same way people just get there's something about the human psyche that's obsessed with, or that loves like or that loves like disturbing dark themes. And I think the people that pretend like they don't like, or that say they don't like this stuff, I think a lot of them are fooling themselves, and that they just won't let themselves, um, that they feel like as they're like succumbing to something beneath them by enjoying this. Where I feel like, in my opinion, it's kind of an inherent part of being a human, is to naturally be intrigued by these types of topics.
To your point, think about the people who would frequent the Colosseum with the fights to the death, having people torn apart by lions, and things that are just so much far removed from what we experience daily. Although, to something you said earlier, a lot of people will seek that out on the internet now. But back then, it was people would want to see it live. It feels like an innate part of us as humanity, the craving for violence. I think there's an added twist to society now, in that it's in some social circles it's not acceptable, or that it's looked down upon. There is a bit of a forbidden fruit element to it now that like furthers the crave for people to watch this sick and twisted stuff, whether it be online or even via films like Pink Flamingo. And I think Pink Flamingo is right in that sweet spot where, I mean, home videos and stuff like that would be like the only way that you could see something that has just messed up stuff on it back then.
Yeah, a like phenomenon I've kind of observed amongst like friends throughout the year. And this is something, or throughout the years, and this is something I don't really like as much as I like a disturbing movie. Oftentimes, because a movie is a movie, and these things that I'm about to talk about are for sure real. Is I would have a lot of friends that would browse and send videos to each other on places like Instagram, of just really disturbing videos, and there were whole accounts dedicated to posting these disturbing videos. And it's stuff like a war footage, like
Mm.
people getting blown up. I know they're one of the most popular subreddits, I think, was called People Dying, and then Reddit banned it, I think. And so like people, in a weird way get addicted to watching like these sick like people getting tortured, people getting beheaded, people getting killed, like and for real. That stuff disturbs me a little more. But but yeah, and then I remember, you know, like at the when the internet was first really becoming a thing in the 2000s, a lot of it, most of it was populated with either like porn sites, and then there were like those sites like Lemon Party and these different sites like these famous videos like Two Girls One Cup, like, and people, there's this allure to them back then. I remember people would always say, oh, have you seen like Two Girls One Cup? Have you seen this like blue cheese, like these weird videos that were all just very disturbing things, and it kind of exists in a weird space in like our culture where I don't know if you can really explain why you're so attracted to it or why people are so attracted to it. I think it's maybe just the fact that it's so um, stuff that we're not used to seeing at all. Um, you know, and maybe, you know, hundreds of years ago when there were public executions and whatnot, people were much more familiar with seeing these types of things. It was much more commonplace. Maybe I'm just kind of spitballing a possibility. So that you know people are still attracted to that kind of thing, and now they just seek it out through videos instead of like real life.
Yeah, and I think just to like speak from personal experience because like I we both grew up during that time period where it infiltrated the mainstream where it was just like Two Girls One Cup was a part of the mainstream, like it was talked about like it was another movie, you know, it went viral, and those videos became viral because everyone was talking about it. But I think what has potentially attracted people to keep seeking it out again and again is that at least when you first like discover this darker side or this more grotesque side or disgusting side, whatever it is it gives you a guttural feeling that you don't frequently get in real life. And like from that era, I can, you know, I can almost take myself back to that moment and how you feel in your stomach where you like literally can feel ill from what you're watching, and it's like you're chasing something so wrong, whatever it is, so disgusting, so violent, whatever, to try to emulate that feeling you remember whenever you maybe didn't have the tolerance for that violence or what have you.
Yeah, it's kind of like, you know, in the same way it's like an addiction, like chasing a type of high. I feel like people get from watching these types of things.
I completely agree because I think that's like where the tolerance aspect comes to. And I think a lot of people have experienced this even just within movies, right? Like maybe a movie like Hostel would have been very disturbing to you like 5 years ago. And then you've seen like now it's kind of more commonplace where it's just like a slasher like Terrifier 2 has just as gory violence in it as a film that was renowned or infamous for it like 20 years ago. And, you know, we keep pushing and pushing the bounds to kind of one up and give people that feeling again. And because the more you see of it, like the less affected you become kind of numb to that level of violence once you've seen it a few times. So it implores films like this, like Pink Flamingos, to be absolutely groundbreaking, and let's take it to a level that people haven't even dreamed of. And thus it has kind of stood the test of time and still is a film that people will kind of turn to for that very reason.
Yeah, yeah. Like I'm just thinking about my own movie watching history and how I used to, think of a movie like The Strangers, where they like break into the mass people break into the house was scary. And now, when I've seen Pink Flamingo, Solo, Irreversible, basically every Gaspar Noé movie, it just doesn't bother me as much. Like it wouldn't scare me anymore because it's like you've already crossed that line to something way worse. And it's it's also like a weird satisfaction you get, like as if like you made it out, like as if like when you're watching this movie you are somehow potentially putting your life on the line. It's almost kind of feels like that, like it's not going to kill you, but going in you kind like for the first time watching a really disturbing feeling, you feel like it might, and that's why a lot of people just leave the theater. They can't handle it. Getting through it is kind of like an achievement.
I completely agree with you. It's a test of your mettle. You know, can you endure
Yeah.
this? And that's why, like, a Irreversible is a film that, and I think that film has so much more to it than just that one scene. And we've discussed, or I've discussed it and watched it and talked to it with others. And yeah, I mean, it's like, can you get through that scene? And it tests your endurance in a way, and you feel like you have made it through something. And I feel like some people look at horror movies that very same way, like, oh, this is the scariest film around, you know. And it is a bit of a head scratcher if you just kind of try to remove yourself from the human experience and look at that objectively. Like, well, why would you want to watch something that's going to really scare you? Well, it's because when you come out of it, you can, like, I made it through, like what you said, you know, like, it's going to be so scary. I don't know if I'm going to be able to watch it the whole way through. And there's a level of achievement with that. And I think kind of once you get to a point where scary films like that are trying to jump scare you, like shock you, you know, give you a jolt, it's like disturbing movies are like the next frontier where you're going to feel something gutturally. It will make you feel sick or whatever. And can you withstand this next level, so to speak?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I That reminded me of Paranormal Activity when that came out. How like there was news about how people had a heart attack while watching it and stuff like that. So it's kind of challenging you to go see it, but nowadays, I'm sure when I was younger, I think that would have scared me a little. But now think of Paranormal Activity. That's not scary. You got a movie like Martyrs or something. Those types of movies are much more freaky to me. Movies that are more based in reality, like Pink Flamingos, like all this stuff really happens in real life. There's not monsters, demons in Pink Flamingos. It's people doing real things, and all the things that have been done in the movie have been happened in real life probably countless times before. And so that fact, also the realism part, adds a whole layer of like spookiness to me.
I completely agree. I want to ask you, Matt, is there any elements or scenes that you want to bring up before we rate the film?
No, I was just gonna. One thing I wanted to do was just like I had a list of all the disturbing scenes, and I just kind of wanted to like list them off if that was okay, just to kind of get the depth of just how like messed up the movie is.
Absolutely.
Um, so there's the eating dog shit scene, the chicken scene, multiple unsimulated sex scenes, tons of nudity, you know, like a huge the guy spreading his asshole, the plot the plot lines of him exposing himself to other people in the park, kidnapping, raping girls, jerking off over their unconscious bodies, incest. Oh, and he injects sperm into the kidnapped unconscious girls as well. So that was just like the litany of all the crap you have to put up in this movie, and it's kind of like, you know, it's if you want to watch it, it's a challenge accepted type thing. You know, if you want to put yourself through it, say you've done it, and you know, there's more to it than just being disturbing. You know, kind of like we mentioned at the beginning, but I think like this is one of those movies that's pure shock value. Is being absurd and having big shock value is its number one, um, like its number one attraction. And you know, so you're going to get a lot of people that give it a half star, as well as a lot of people that give it a 5 star.
Yeah, I it definitely shocks, to your point and to our points, I guess. I feel like there is things deeper. The satire rather, is a lot more, I guess, clinical than you would expect on the face of this film. If you think that it's just trying to shock with no intention behind it, you would be wrong. And I think we touched upon what exactly Waters was trying to do with that. And I think it could merit an even higher score, but what I gave it immediately after watching was a 3.5 out of 5, which is probably very not a common rating for that film. Like, to your point, it's probably loved or hate, but I was able to appreciate it. I thought it was very good. It wasn't necessarily, I mean, it's not similar to anything, so no surprise that it wasn't so much in my wheelhouse, but I appreciated the fact that it was so different than anything I'd ever seen, and was actually a point that made me like the film even more. Matt, what was your rating and kind of thought process behind it as well?
Yeah, I gave it a 4 out of 5. You know, I enjoyed it the way you can enjoy it. I it's disturbing, you know, in a very different way than The Idiots is.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of like, you know, the I feel like movies like the disturbed movies like The Idiots and Salo have a little more of that type of political social commentary that I tend to like in movies, which is probably why I would favor that over Pink Flamingos, which I feel like is a lot more of just a shock type movie. You know, but I also just part of the reason it's got a decently high score for me is because all the stuff I mentioned about how I love the John Waters satirical style and all of that as well as just enjoying disturbing movies in general. So yeah, I like this one. I think I could also say it would be a good like if you want to get into watching disturbing movies, I think this would be a good one to start at more than The Idiots, I would say.
I agree with you. It feels, yeah, like a good one to start with, because the feelings and atmosphere that are surrounding these, which is because of how they are rooted in real life, makes them more disturbing than you could actually argue more disturbing than most of the most disturbing films of all time. That it just, it's hard to say. Like, in Martyrs, it's played up to be this, just, it's the worst thing ever, right? But with this, it's like celebrated and acted as though it's like a good thing. So it takes a bit of the edge off of those scenes. Does that make sense at all to you?
Yeah, it doesn't have like that like the Lars von like not the idiots, but the other Lars von Trier movies, for example, where it just feels dark and scary. Like the Pink Flamingos doesn't feel scary at all, really. It's got like a lighthearted tone to it.
Exactly. It feels less intense because of that, I think.
Yeah.
Well, Matt, I want to thank you for joining me to talk about these two films, and thank you for recommending these films. I thought these go together very well, and they were definitely interesting and films I will never forget.
Yeah, yeah, I've enjoyed talking about them. Thank you for having me on.
Thank you all for joining us as well, and we will catch you on the flippity flip. Bye, y'all.